When Maya Collins returned to her hometown, she carried only an old backpack and the key to a decaying woodshop left behind by her D-Day veteran grandfather. Neighbors stood at the gate laughing. This pile of junk is only fit for the scrapyard sawdust girl. Maya felt her heart ache, but her eyes burned with determination. In the workshop's darkness, she stumbled upon a dusty steel army chest, its lid etched with a strange insignia. When a soft green light suddenly flickered through a crack, Maya realized this was no scrap. It was a secret that could silence the entire town. Maya Collins stood in silence inside the old woodshop, once filled with the sounds of her grandfather William Collins's saws and hammers, a D-Day veteran who had stormed Normandy. Now only a leaking tin roof, rotting planks that smelled of damp sawdust, and a heavy silence remained. In her coat pocket, Maya still carried the stack of inheritance papers. Since the day she learned of his passing, everyone in town had told her she was crazy to keep this place. "It's just worthless junk," they said. Just yesterday, a neighbor had stood at the gate, pointing and laughing. "All your life in New York and you come back home to cling to rotten planks. Sawdust girl, just sell it off already." Maya pressed her lips together. She had left behind a stable office job in the city because, deep in her heart, she knew her grandfather had left this place for more than old wood. He had never spoken much, but each time he mentioned the comrades who never returned, his eyes carried a weight that haunted her. She began clearing the corner of the old workbench. Beneath layers of thick dust, Maya discovered a cracked leather journal. It was her grandfather's, in faded but steady writing on the first page, Lantern Project 1944. Her hands trembled as she flipped the pages, eyes running over the slanted but legible lines. "This light is not meant to guide weapons, but to guide men. On the night of Normandy, our soldiers needed a lamp unseen by the enemy. A soft infrared glow just enough to lead the wounded back to the aid station." Maya froze. She had read about wartime technology before and knew the U.S. military experimented with crude infrared signals during WWII. Could it be that her grandfather had been one of those men? She turned another page and found a small slip of paper wedged inside. "Beware the Watchers." Maya's heart pounded. What did it mean? That someone had wanted to steal this invention? And if so, how long had they been watching her family? She sank into the rickety chair, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. For the first time, she realized her grandfather had not simply left her a crumbling workshop. He had left her a legacy, a warning, and perhaps a burden. That light, never to be sold or flaunted, was meant only to protect life. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks, carrying faint laughter from neighbors whispering in the distance. But inside, Maya knew her answer. She would not sell this place. She would uncover the secret of the lantern, even if it meant facing a mocking town or the mysterious Watchers her grandfather had warned her about. The next morning, Maya returned to the workshop at dawn. The crisp country air slipped through the broken doorframe, and early sunlight cut through the dust like drifting smoke. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, "Beware the Watchers." She rummaged through boxes of decaying wood. Among a stack of yellowed documents, Maya uncovered an old photo album. Inside was a black and white picture of a group of American GIs standing together. Each wore uniforms with eagle patches on their sleeves. Among them was her grandfather, young and proud, standing beside a strange object, a massive bronze lantern, partly hidden beneath a tarp. Below the photo, someone had scrawled, "Normandy 1944, only for the group to know." Maya's hands shook. This was no longer just a vague entry in a journal. The lantern was real, and her grandfather had helped build it. She turned to the corner of the shop and began clearing away piles of planks. When her hammer struck the floorboards, a hollow thunk echoed. Heart racing, Maya dropped to her knees, pressing her ear to the wood. It was empty beneath. She grabbed a crowbar and pried up the rotted boards one by one. At that moment, a strange sound broke the silence outside. Footsteps crunching on gravel. Maya held her breath, peering through a crack in the wall. A shadow moved across the yard, then vanished. Her pulse quickened. The Watchers. The warning on that slip of paper blazed in her mind. Forcing herself to stay calm, she levered up the final plank. A shallow cavity appeared. Inside was a steel army chest, rusted and scarred but intact. Its lid bore faint numbers, and the engraved symbol of a flame crossed out. Maya hauled it free, sweat soaking through her shirt. When the chest landed on the shop floor, sunlight filtering through the roof glinted faintly across its scratched surface. She crouched, staring at it, her chest tightening. This was what her grandfather had hidden for decades. The journal had been clear. After the war, the U.S. government had ordered all unapproved devices destroyed, especially technology that could be misused. But her grandfather had defied that order. He had buried the lantern. Risking everything, Maya brushed her fingers over the rusted lock and tried twisting it. It didn't budge. She knew she would need a special key. Still, seeing the chest proved that every word her grandfather wrote was accurate. Outside, the wind rattled the trees again. It sounded like someone still lingering nearby. Maya hurriedly covered the cavity, dragging old planks back into place. Her heart hammered, but inside she felt a fierce resolve rising. She would find a way to open that chest, and before the Watchers could act, she would be the first to uncover the secret her grandfather had risked everything to protect. Maya could not solve the mystery of the chest on her own. She found a list of soldiers who had served with her grandfather in a stack of old papers. One name stood out, James Harris, with a brief, trembling note beside it, the keeper of the key. She quickly searched for him. Harris was still alive, now over 90, living in seclusion in a wooden cabin deep in the forest. Several hours' drive from town. Without hesitation, Maya slipped the journal and the photo of the GIs into her bag, started up the old pickup and set off. The road wound narrowly between dense pine trees. The scent of sap and damp earth filled the truck cab. When she arrived, she found a small cabin with a slanted roof. Its porch hung with old animal traps and rusted oil lamps. A thin older man with silver hair sat in a creaking rocking chair. His eyes clouded but still sharp, staring quietly out into the woods. Maya stepped onto the porch. The older man's voice was raspy. "You're William Collins's granddaughter." She froze. You know. Harris squinted. Those eyes, I'd recognize them anywhere, but words can be faked. Prove you're truly his blood. Maya's heart pounded, then she remembered a line from the journal. Rainy day, little Maya dropped the hammer. I still keep the dent on the workbench. She recited the details. Harris was silent, his lips trembling, then he nodded. You are his, he told me. Only you would have the courage to find the truth. Maya handed him the photo of the American soldiers. Harris's hands shook as he took it, his eyes brightening. That's us. Normandy, 1944, and that. He pointed at the massive object in the photo. That's the lantern. Maya pressed. What exactly is the lantern? Why did my grandfather have to hide it? Harris drew a deep breath, his gaze distant. The lantern isn't a weapon, it's a rescue light. In the dark, normal light exposes your position to the enemy. But we figured out how to filter light through a crude infrared lens, creating a soft glow the enemy couldn't see. It guided the wounded to safety. Hundreds of lives were saved by it. He set the photo down, his voice tightening. After the war, the government ordered it destroyed. They feared if the technology fell into the wrong hands, it would be turned into a weapon. But William, your grandfather, couldn't. He believed this light had to be preserved as a symbol of humanity. So he hid it at great risk. Harris gripped his cane, disappeared inside the cabin, then returned with a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal an old iron key, its head engraved with the image of a flame. He asked me to keep it, to wait for the day you'd come. This is the rest of the story. Maya's hands trembled as she took it. In that moment, she knew she had stepped deeper onto the path her grandfather had begun, a path not easily turned back from. Maya returned to the workshop late in the afternoon with the iron key Harris had given her. Fine rain misted the yard, and wind whistled through the holes in the tin roof like a sigh. The steel chest still sat there, cold and heavy, as if waiting for her to open it. Maya knelt and slid the key into the lock. A sharp click echoed, and the padlock clattered to the floor, its sound carrying across the empty shop. Her heart raced. She took a deep breath and slowly lifted the heavy lid. The smell of old metal and damp pine spilt out. On top lay a broken U.S. Army insignia, its jagged edge still stained with dried, brownish blood. Maya's hands trembled as she picked it up, imagining one of her grandfather's comrades falling in battle and leaving this behind. A feeling of grief and reverence rose inside her. She pushed aside the yellowed canvas beneath. And there it was, a massive lantern of bronze and wood, nearly half her height. Thick lenses encircled its cylindrical body, inside which crude but intricate metal components were visible. Etched into its side was a symbol of flame crossed out. Maya laid her palm on the lantern's body. It was ice cold. She hesitated momentarily, then found a small mechanical switch on its side. A soft blue-green light flared to life the moment she turned it on. It wasn't harsh or glaring, but spread gently, filling the workshop. In that instant, dust motes floated in the air, reflecting the glow like thousands of tiny stars. Maya held her breath. She understood why her grandfather had called it the lantern. This wasn't a lamp for attack, but a light meant to lead through darkness. Inside the chest was also a small cloth pouch. Inside were several sheets of tightly drawn schematics and a folded letter. On the envelope to the keeper of the lantern, Maya's hands shook as she opened it. Her grandfather's familiar handwriting appeared. If you're reading this, it means you found the lantern. Remember, in the land of the free, there are lights that must remain hidden to protect the brave. This light is not to be sold, not to be shown off, and never to be turned into a weapon. It is only to save lives. Guard it, because one day the world may need it. Tears streamed down Maya's cheeks. She clutched the letter as if hearing his voice beside her. Suddenly a creak echoed from outside. A shadow slipped past the broken window. Maya, startled, quickly flicked the switch off. Darkness rushed in, and all she could hear was her pounding heart. She knew her time was running out. This secret no longer belonged solely to her family. It had awakened the attention of the Watchers. From this moment on, every step Maya took would be followed. Rumors of the strange blue light in the old workshop spread quickly throughout Hartwell. People who once mocked Maya now gathered at the gate, whispering nonstop, "It's probably just some old oil lamp." No. I saw the glow all the way in her backyard. There's nothing like it. Soon, strangers began to appear. The first was a wealthy collector from the city, driving a gleaming luxury car. He stepped inside, his voice sweet as honey. "Miss Collins, I'm willing to pay you enough money to buy back this whole town. A one-of-a-kind relic like that belongs in my collection." Maya looked him in the eye and replied simply, "It's not for sale." He shrugged and left, but not long after. Another man arrived, this time in a crisp black suit, leather briefcase in hand. He introduced himself as a representative of a large technology corporation. His voice was cold, each word clipped. "We know you're holding a rare device. With our resources, it could be upgraded for modern defense. Combat drones would no longer need standard guidance lights. Your lantern could be the key. Do you realize it's worth millions, even tens of millions of dollars?" Maya held her breath. She pictured a future where the town prospered. Debts erased, and she transformed from the sawdust girl into a hero who brought wealth. But instantly her grandfather's letter rose in her mind. "This light is not to be weaponized." She shook her head. "No." The man raised an eyebrow, a cold smile curling on his lips. "Are you certain? Sometimes we have ways to make people reconsider." The threat beneath his words sent a shiver down her spine. That night, Maya's phone rang, an unknown number. She answered, and a deep voice came through. "If you're smart, you'll sell. You don't want trouble." Then the line went dead. Maya sat in the dark, clutching the lantern's key. Fear washed over her, but at the same time, a fierce fire rose in her chest. She would not betray her grandfather's legacy. A few days later, the town council summoned her. One member stood and declared firmly, "If you cooperate, the corporation promises to build a factory here, creating jobs for hundreds. This is Hartwell's chance to change its future. You should think of the community." Maya clenched her fists, sweat dampening her palms. Every eye in town was on her, expectant, pressuring, accusing, but in her heart one truth echoed: not every American dream can be bought with money. The town council meeting was held in the red brick building at the center of Hartwell. Every seat was filled, farmers, carpenters, even high school students. In the front row sat several elderly veterans in jackets with faded war patches, their eyes fixed on the stage. At the podium stood the corporation's representative, sharp in his tailored suit, contracts neatly stacked. The atmosphere was heavy. The chairman struck the gavel. "Miss Collins, the floor is yours." Maya stepped forward, cradling the lantern wrapped in cloth. When she set it down, the hall buzzed with whispers. With one decisive motion, she pulled the cloth away. The murmurs fell silent. She placed her hand on the switch and turned it. A soft blue glow spread across the room, reflected in every pair of eyes. A strange hush settled. Maya's voice rang out, calm but assertive. "This is the lantern. My grandfather and his comrades created it not to sell, not to kill, but to save lives. On the night of Normandy, this light guided the wounded home. It was never meant to fill pockets, it was meant to preserve freedom." The corporate representative cut in sharply. "Miss Collins, you are holding a device of strategic value. This community would benefit if it were developed properly. Don't let personal feelings harm the town." Maya lifted her gaze, her eyes blazing. "Not everything that can be bought should be sold. Hartwell does not need to sell its soul for money." An old veteran rose, his hand trembling but his voice firm. "William Collins saved me with that light. He kept the lantern for life, not for war. I stand with Maya." Applause broke out, hesitant at first. Then swelling through the hall, people began to rise from their seats. The lantern's glow shimmered across faces once skeptical, now filled with respect. The man in the suit gripped his briefcase tightly, his brow furrowed. "You don't understand. This technology can be replicated." Maya cut him off, steady and unyielding. "No, it cannot. The lantern was handcrafted from alloys and lenses that only my grandfather and Harris knew how to calibrate. Without the original designs, no engineer on Earth can recreate this light." The murmurs rose again, this time solidly in her favor. The hall swelled with emotion, heads nodded everywhere. Maya looked down at the lantern, then raised her voice one last time. "This town once laughed at me for holding onto rotting wood, but this place hid a light of freedom, and I will never let anyone turn it into darkness." The hall erupted, cheers, clapping, voices shouting her name. The corporate man stood frozen. His face dark, then slowly gathered his papers and walked out. The lantern glowed gently in the center of the hall, a living testament that Hartwell had rediscovered something greater than money, its dignity and its justice. The meeting had ended, but the battle was not over. Just as Maya switched off the workshop lights that night, a sleek black car pulled up at the gate. A man in a black suit stepped out, his eyes cold. In his hand was a thick envelope. He set it on the table, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "This is the final offer. The money inside is enough to change your life, you and this entire town. Sign it and we'll leave quietly. If you refuse," he paused, his look heavy with threat, "you'll be bringing trouble upon yourself." Maya looked at the envelope. The number inside stunned her enough to build schools, hospitals, and wipe out Hartwell's debts. She bit her lip, a wave of temptation rising within her. At that moment, the wooden door creaked open. Harris stepped in, leaning on his cane, his face aged but his eyes still fierce. He looked straight at the man, then turned to Maya. "They came to us like this before. In 1946, men in black suits knocked on the door, claiming the lantern could help the country. William and I refused. We were threatened, followed, but we held firm. Your grandfather said, if we give in, this light will turn into darkness." Maya's throat tightened. The story of her grandfather and Harris standing together against fear after the war landed squarely in her hands. The suited man frowned, his voice dropping. "Do you really want to throw away the only chance to save this town? Do you want them to stay poor when one signature from you could change everything?" Maya glanced around. Her grandfather's letter still lay on the table, its words engraved in her memory. "In the land of the free, there are lights that must remain hidden to protect the brave." She drew a long breath, then straightened, her voice firm and unwavering. "No, the lantern is not for sale. It is a symbol of life, of freedom, of justice. And liberty and justice for all is not something that can be bought." The air grew still. The man clenched the envelope, then suddenly slammed it on the table, his voice a growl. "You'll regret this." He turned and left, the door slamming shut. The black car sped off into the night, leaving the yard silently. Maya turned to Harris. He placed a trembling hand on her shoulder and gave a faint smile. "William would be proud. You chose the right path." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying a rare sense of peace, but Maya knew the storm was not yet over. The corporation might retreat for now, but this light would always draw the greedy. Still, a steady faith burned within her. She had stood where her grandfather would have wanted. From then on, the lantern would belong to the community, not money. Months later, the old woodshop on the edge of Hartwell had transformed beyond recognition. The roof was repaired and the rotting boards were replaced with fresh pine. A new sign hung at the entrance, "Community Workshop Lantern of Hope." Inside, there was no more dust or darkness. Children gathered to learn carpentry, elderly veterans passed on their skills, and townspeople came by to help repair tables and tools. Maya was no longer the sawdust girl they once mocked, but the bridge connecting generations. In the most honored corner of the hall, the lantern sat inside a special glass case. It no longer burned day and night, but at every memorial event, Maya would switch it on for a few minutes. The soft blue glow filled the room, wrapping it in solemn silence. No one dared to laugh anymore. Instead, eyes shimmered with pride. One afternoon, during a class, a boy of about 13 shyly raised his hand. "Miss Collins, my grandfather also fought at Normandy. He never came home, but when I see this light, I think of him. Do you think maybe he was guided by the lantern too?" Maya fell silent. She stepped closer and gently placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Perhaps he was, and even if he didn't return, this light carries the spirit of men like him who fought not for money, but for freedom." The boy lowered his head, tears brimming. The classroom fell utterly silent. At that moment, Maya understood that the lantern was not just an invention, but a symbol for the next generation to find meaning and faith in. On Veterans Day, the workshop hall overflowed with people. Harris, frail but determined, was guided to the front row. Maya switched on the lantern. The blue glow bathed his silver hair. He smiled faintly, his voice trembling. "William kept his vow, and now you've carried it on." Applause rose, not loud, but steady and solemn. The people of Hartwell, once those who had ridiculed Maya, now stood to honor her and the legacy their town had nearly lost. Maya looked around, her heart swelling with comfort. All the bitterness, the mocking laughter had turned into respect. The old workshop, the lantern, and her grandfather's story had become part of the town's shared memory. That night, Maya stayed behind alone. She switched on the lantern one last time for the day. Its soft blue glow spilt out the window, lighting the pines in the distance. Children's voices still echoed faintly outside. "That's the light of hope." Maya smiled softly, whispering, "And it will shine for generations to come."